That's a nice introduction. You have to remember I'm also heading for 80 and I'm tired in the evening, so I hope not to be addled. This is really good to see you all. I feel very welcome, and I haven't been a very active member for WILPF, but I have been active in the peace movement and very much on your side, because I think gender's really strongly related to the whole business of war and peace. And I'm going to start by talking briefly about the words violence and power, because what do we mean by them and how do they relate to conflict? Conflict, as you've seen in the introduction to this session, it's just part of life. I mean, who doesn't have conflicts, minor ones domestically, at least once a day, and probably more times than that in my case. But that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter if you're not harming anybody. What matters is the harm that often can develop from some stupid conflicts and some big conflicts. So I think that's an important distinction to make. And on violence, which is the problem, always the problem, somebody called Johann Galtung, which many of you may have heard of, who was a big theoretician back in as early as the 60s, I think. And can that be true? Well, possibly. But anyway, by the time I was really getting into conflict transformation professionally, he was somebody. And he defined violence as avoidable insults to basic human needs. I think that's really important because people can have their human needs violated in all sorts of ways. And he did a famous triangle where he had direct violence on one corner, cultural violence on another corner, or angle, I should say, and on the third, structural violence. I always find it, which order they go in, but the whole point is that they drive each other, direct, cultural, and structural. And actually, cultural is absolutely of the essence, because it's what justifies all the violence of all forms. If we have a culture that says all those things that we would see as abuse of power and cruelty, very often the culture says, no, that's good, that's great, that's how it should be. So that's the biggest thing to overcome, and that's why I think campaigning on gender is really important, because that's a major part of it. So that gender is an issue that's into the structures, the way it is in the workplace, who gets the jobs, who gets paid what, but more seriously than that even, who runs the household, who gets told what to do by whom, who gets to wait upon their children, or, I remember being in an airport once and seeing a mother telling her daughter to go and get something for her son, who was younger than the daughter, but because the daughter ought to be serving him because he was the male. And so this is the worry, of course, that in a deeply ingrained culture, women often go along with it and are part of it. And that's a hard thing to swallow, really. And people need support in getting out of that. War, as such, is obviously nothing but violence and gross, direct physical violence. That's what it's made of. And that is again, a justified thing, a glorious thing. So the absolute apogee of masculinity is to be a warrior hero. This is a real emblem of what it is to be a real man. And that's still very obviously true in a lot of cultures, still is to a degree in ours. You know, our heroes and important people who should have a voice. And yeah, that is a lot of what is promoting militarism, which people seem not to question. Most people don't question it. Most people still say, well, we need our men to defend us and so on, forgetting that often women get raped in war, abused in war in all sorts of ways, left at home to make everything else work. It's a hard time for women, but it's men's time to be glorious and heroic. And it's our culture that makes war, which is patently so disastrous and dreadful, seem okay and necessary, and as long as it's our war, a good war, or somebody on our side. So I think this idea of culture as the driver of violence, and that particularly the driver of military violence, where you're not supposed to question it, you're supposed to be a good nationalist and think it's the right thing. That's really hard for us to live with, and we mustn't live with it. It's yeah, it's something that's so well established. You will all know this. It's hard to question. What would you do if? And it's always the baddies versus us. And to me, it's not okay just to go out and kill people. Then you're just being the baddies as well. Anyway, that's all for discussion, obviously. So, another thing I just wanted to say there is that I think a lot of men actually suffer from the construction of gender in that strongman way. I know my brothers are far less naturally aggressive than I am. They're far kinder and gentler. They would always be seen as not up to the mark if it were a contest of who's the best man. So I don't think it's only women who are constrained by gender stereotypes and gender demands, any more than women want to be always made I'm a pretty little girl sort of person. And I think, some solidarity with men who also are the victims of culturally dominant gender models. Power, that's very much related to this. What's our model of power? Do we have a power model that's about domination? That very much goes with the stereotype of strong, what it is to be strong. It means you dominate. And if you think of the way business runs, you've got to come out on top. It's how politics run. It's all about who has all the power. And you have power over other people. A competitive society is about doing better than other people, and in many ways getting the better of other people. There's another model of power, which is having power for and with other people. So cooperative power. And I think that's a sort of power that women are habitually good at, because they often have to be very good at it to support each other in the face of the other sort of power. And if you think about movements and action for change, cooperation, solidarity is absolutely of the essence. So that's, to me, that's the kind of power model we want to be working to. And I'm setting these things out just because I think these are important in the concept of conflict transformation. So conflict resolution is about doing things together. It's about bringing people, resolving whatever conflict there is, and bringing people together to cooperate and build the future together, whether that's the future in the home or the future in the country or the world. That's what conflict resolution would be about. But when there's a situation of structural violence, so, the whole system is violent, and it's often accompanied by direct violence, physical violence, or the violence of oppression, then cooperation doesn't feel like an option, not at least with the dominant power holders. So at that point, you need to build solidarity with people who do want to come together to counter that oppressive situation. And at that point, you need non-violence in the form of resistance and in order to get to the point where you can negotiate. You can't negotiate between totally unequal power systems. You have to have some kind of relative power parity. You have to be needed by the other side in some way to acquiesce or to support or something. They can't carry on if they don't have other people functioning in the way that they want them to function. I think this is important, and the way I came to understand it was that when I was first active in the non-violence movement, when I was doing the international FOR stuff, this was really the main issue that we dealt with. It was called the Fellowship of Reconciliation, but actually what we were doing mostly was supporting people in countries where there was a really violent dominant power, and people were trying non-violently to counter that power and get a regime change. And there were some immense successes. For a long time, it had just been Martin Luther King and preceded by Gandhi, of course. And these were the great models of non-violent power. But in fact, then these other countries were achieving terrific transformation across Latin America, for instance. And that was really, really inspiring. I mean, in the Philippines, they got rid of President Marcos. And then in Europe, the whole of Soviet communism collapsed because of non-violent action by the people. And somebody of my age can remember very well seeing the streets absolutely bunged with people and people standing in the center of cities for days on end until the power collapsed, the power holders. This was a huge triumph for non-violence and solidarity for non-violence. And then after that, unfortunately, some of the entities that then came, for instance, when the Soviet Union broke up, there were all these entities left which took back their old country name and their language and defined themselves in relation to the people who'd always lived there, not the poor old people, Russians, who'd been moved to live there, who they kind of turned against. And so some of these newly liberated areas became areas of conflict. because it was a new conflict in a new situation. And at that point, conflict resolution really came into its own. So it's a funny thing that while the non-violence was happening, the active political non-violence, somehow that wasn't recognized as, I don't know, was it recognized as peacemaking? I don't know. But then conflict resolution kind of took over. And so the conflict transformation theory came to put the two things together, and they're sequential, really. And I'll just go through the diagram that I made years ago, which has been used quite a lot. And I'll go through it with you if we could have it on the screen. Thank you very much. So the heading there is stages and processes in conflict transformation. So then at the top left, we have a situation of oppression, exclusion, hidden or latent conflict. So latent, just brewing, but not quite happened yet. And then we have the idea of awareness raising, what Paulo Freire, the great educator of oppressed peoples, called conscientization. It means waking up to what the reality of your situation is. And once you've got that, you can mobilize together to build a movement. So group formation, empowerment for action, obviously a lot of non-violence training going on. I had amazing colleagues who used to do that. Then analysis, how to, understand your situation, have a strategy for it, and building ever greater support, because you need to get to the point where this oppressive government or whatever can be countered. They can't stop ignoring you. As long as you're small and weak and just a little group, or even a bigger movement, they don't have to take any notice of you. But as soon as you really can be able to affect their dominance, really not obey them anymore, then they have an incentive to go and enter into dialogue with you. But the important thing to remember is that all that early part, you keep talking. You keep trying to talk to the powers that be. You don't cut them off. So however risky it is, you try to be in dialogue with them so that you have even a glimpse of a relationship with them by the time you have the power to insist. And at that point, you're entering into the little kind of roundy box called conflict resolution, which begins with preparing dialogue, arranging to have talks with or without mediation. So we always think of the mediator as essential. It could be just that there's a representative of the group who's managed to get an in with somebody who's in a big power group. But anyway, you need a way in, and mediators, third parties can help, because you can just be like the ring holder, the facilitator. And then you can have negotiation, again, with or without mediation. I put that because often I've been a person in the middle, and they're not the important people. The important people are the parties. So that's why I'm a bit anally retentive about having with or without mediation written in there. And what you're aiming for is a settlement, a kind of workable agreement. And while you're doing all that, you are modifying stereotypes. So you've got this view of the other as enemies. But gradually, when you really listen to and talk to other people, it can't stay as bad as that. You find the human being behind whatever mask you'd put on them, or even that they'd worn themselves. It's a really changing dynamic. So you have modification of stereotypes and processing the past. It's not the only processing of the past that'll have to go on, but at least with the people directly involved, that will be happening. And that can lead to reconciliation or, an actual resolution of the conflict and an actual forgiving of each other, because that's important. It's hatred and anger are not going to help build peace. They're just not. They may be very, very hard to deal with. But I've seen extraordinary things done between parties that have killed each other and hated each other. I've seen somebody, for instance, telling when the process was going really badly, and he obviously knew something needed to help and break the dynamic. And he told a hideous story about himself and his own cruelty and apologized for it. And I think that was a hugely brave thing to do. And he had done terrible things. But it made a lot of difference that he was willing to humiliate himself, really, in order to save the talks. And it was very powerful. And that can lead then to, as I say, to reconciliation and resolution. Now, you may have many questions about all that, but if that can be achieved, there are lots of other things that have to happen. So peace building is kind of starting again from the ground up. So rebuilding community, because the communities are likely to have a lot of enmity between them. Reconstruction and redevelopment, that can often be a big physical challenge. And democracy and political participation brought in there. What I haven't included in that diagram is the business of the actual demilitarization process, because where you've had warring sides, I mean, if I think of, for instance, liberation armies, in the deal, presumably they will have been written out of things because their function will have gone, but you have to find some kind of role for them in society. You can't just chuck them on the rubbish heap because they've been instructed to lay down their arms. So that's quite a business. How do you reabsorb former fighters into the communities? So there's a huge amount that goes behind these simple words, but there it is. So you're establishing and maintaining healthy power relations. And the final shape there is about a constant process, constant of peace maintenance, because nothing is stable. Things are always changing, and things can go pear-shaped again. They can change in all sorts of ways. So, but hopefully you've learned something from the previous experience and you have more resources to deal with it. So constructive conflict management. Conflict management used to be a very much favored term, conflict management, which sounds rather grim. In a way, it's what you it's what you do in families or anywhere, but it's a rather low grade ambition, isn't it? But it probably has to happen. You know, in any organization, for instance, there'll be conflicts that arise and conflicts that are resolved, but to manage them and then to resolve them is important. And the whole major thing is conflict. It's often called conflict prevention, but I won't go with that because I get fed up with it. It's violence prevention you're trying to do. Conflict's always going to happen, can't prevent it, but you can prevent violence. So that is that. Just a few things I'd like to add, and then we can have questions on any of this. Yeah, there have been all these great successes, but what we have to do is to alter group dynamics in a society. And the group dynamics of actually doing workshops in situations of conflicts with conflicting parties also has to be managed. So I've run women-only workshops, for instance, that's interesting. So if you have a mixed group that you're working with, I can remember particularly in the former Soviet Union, which was very traditional, all those countries were, and very gender weighted. The men would be extremely bossy and authoritarian, and I'm a conflictologist, and don't you tell me what to think, kind of thing. And the women would be very quiet, and you had to encourage them to speak up. They learned a lot, and they learned fast. And a few years later, it wouldn't be the same. But to start with, that's how it was. But also, I used to facilitate women-only workshops with a colleague, and they were very different, much more free-flowing, less kind of trying to score points. I'm being a bit stereotyping here, but it's just what I found. Funnily enough, I had to facilitate one workshop in the North Caucasus for, that's right, it was for women only. And they were horrified, the women. Why do we have to be here without the men? Which I was rather shocked about. And then by the end of it, they were absolutely partying, and I think would have gone on for weeks. Just to have that space where they could be heard, they didn't have to be interrupted, they could have a laugh together and run the show rather than having it run by other people. So that was kind of refreshing, but it tells you a lot about what power relations were socially. But this is a while back, and things change, and I think the women's movement achieves a hell of a lot, so shouldn't despair. Just a brief comment about UN Resolution 1325, which asserted in the United Nations the right of women to participate in peace processes, national peace processes. And that clearly was important. I have no idea how effective it's been because I haven't been working at that level, and I've been retired for some time. And the places I've most recently worked in, that wasn't an issue because it was still more civil society stuff going on. But that was an important thing, and it shows that things can change. And as I say, I think working together, cooperating for something is something, I think that's, I'm not saying that women don't fight. I can remember people pulling each other's hair out in my school playground, but, you know, I think somehow that's a good bit of female culture that girls are expected to get on, and they do on the whole get on. So we've got a head start. And I think, yeah, I think, oh, just one last thing I wanted to say. was that I have seen extraordinary, I haven't seen them, I've read about them and I've known some of the people, extraordinary experiences of women in intervening in violent conflict and stopping it. So some people I worked with in Northeast, well, South Asia, shall I say, because I shouldn't talk about this publicly, so I'll cover them up. But the women in that region actually used to go into where there was a village, where there was an outbreak of male violence between different factions. They would go in the middle of the violence and stop it. And the curious thing is that somehow the male macho honorability required the men not to hurt the women. Okay, they raped them in war, but in that circumstance, they had to stop if the women came in the midst of them and asked them to stop. And I think that's quite extraordinary. That is courage to me. And I do remember that in the civil war in Sierra Leone years back, women there used nakedness to stop fighting, unless I've mixed the two, but I think it was there. Anyway, nakedness is sometimes used as an additional sign of vulnerability by women to challenge the men to be decent and not shame themselves by attacking somebody weaker and more vulnerable, which is a curious inversion of power and raises all sorts of questions, but I just felt that deserved a mention because it's truly phenomenal to me. I suppose I'm happy to take all sorts of questions and comments, but I'd also like us to get on at some point to the question of what does all this mean for now? Because we're in such dire straits at the moment. The structures, the culture, the practice of extreme violence is all around us. And dominance of human beings over nature looks set to ruin our planet. It's in the middle of it. So what does this mean for us and for our power? I hope we can have a real good think about that. It may be that we think all this stuff that I've been talking about is not relevant, and I don't mind about that, but I do think we need to use this chance to talk about how do we get our planet from the domination model of power to the cooperation model of power, because if we don't, we're finished as a species, almost as a planet Earth. The risks now are so great that we can't afford not to challenge that power model. And I would like to see our government get rid of its blankety blank defense budget and put all its efforts into dialogue, remake its diplomacy team, which has been shrunk and shrunk, get it women and men in it, and get dialogue going at a global level, because that's the only way forward. And we have to challenge militarism more and more and show it up for what it is, which is just a recipe for annihilation and an abuse of the human capacity and spirit, a denial of kindness. And kindness, I think, has to be everything in the end. Thank you.
Very, very good. Amazing. Eliza, can you take that down so we can see each other? Good. Thank you. That was amazing, Diana. Um, I'm sure there are people who want to make individual questions and comments at, on what you were saying, um, but not to neglect your idea that we've got to move forward into the current situation.
Mhm.
Um, is there anyone who wants to make an immediate comment on this? Put up your hand or show it in some way. Well, can I ask? Go on then, Claire. It's all yours.
I just wanted to mention young people because you've talked a lot about gender and about the role of women in peacemaking processes. And one of the features of not just now, but in the past as well, but at the moment and in relation to the environment, the role of young people has become really important. And I wondered if you had anything in particular to say about that.
Yes, gladly, and it's a good thing to raise. We run a sixth form conference here in Bath every autumn, and I am so impressed by the young people, particularly on environment, but also very much on social justice. They've always been very hot on those things. However, what I notice, and it's very difficult with your own close family, I notice that none of my 4 grandchildren shows the least interest in environmental issues or anti-war issues. I mean, I think they've all been, well, one lot of them have always been dragged along to demos of all sorts, but I don't see them. And I think there are a lot of youngsters who just choose to enjoy their lives. It's like the whole business of, do you fly on holidays? They're all flying all over the place. I can't believe it. So I think kind of yes and no to what you're saying. I think there are some brilliant youngsters. I mean, we've got our 2 teenage grandchildren, local ones, with us on Friday, and we're going to take them along to an XR demo outside some nasty bank and let them watch it and think how good it is and talk to them a lot about it. It's very difficult with your close relatives. So, and the people who come to our conferences are the ones who are keen to come. So what I don't know what about the other ones. I mean, other participants here may have views, but I can't really go much further than that. I mean, I just feel terrible because I was going to say I find it hard not to despair. I do despair, but I think better to carry on anyway. You have to carry on anyway. I'm not giving up. That's all. Better to piss than not. Not pissing in the wind is better than not pissing at all. That's my chief motto. And I shan't give up. But hope, hard. And so behave as if we have hope. That's what we have to do, I think. And I just feel overwhelmed if I think about the future that my grandchildren face. I really do. So sorry to be gloomy. I think we should do all we can to educate and empower them.
Another comment? Sorry? Is there anyone ready to comment again? I'd like to ask, and I suppose this is too gloomy again, about the failures when you went through those processes that you outlined in the diagram, because it might lead us on to thinking about the current situation that looks almost impossible. What do you want to say about that?
Let me think about the failures.
Somewhere where you didn't break through.
Well, there are various ones. I mean, one is Georgia, Abkhazia, which is, I don't have to be confidential about. That's in the north, is it? No, the South Caucasus or in between. Abkhazia's a bit that did belong to Georgia. Georgia tried to take away its autonomy, and then there was a civil war, and Abkhazia now is more or less in the pocket of Russia, because Russia has defended them against the Georgians. So they have never achieved the actual peace and the return of refugees that they've been campaigning for, but they keep going. So they just keep at it, and the same people are still involved, and they obviously keep renewing themselves enough to keep going, but they don't give up. If I think about the people in the Southeast Asia that I've worked with, they got so far. They managed to stop the actual live violence between the different factions. They signed a covenant, which they have none of them gone back on. They haven't started killing each other again, but they're still quarreling, and therefore failing to get any resolution with the big power that controls them. So I think people like us, they don't give up. Once they've committed to something, it's hard, just in the sense of personal honor, to go back on it. So in a way, you can say you've put a peg in it, if you see what I mean, like as if you were climbing. You've got a peg there for the future. But and then there are things that do go on. I mean, I ran a workshop for a surprise workshop where I had a week to, some of you will have heard this, but people in one of the, what do you call them? I'm getting tired. Yes, the Protestant paramilitaries, one of the Protestant paramilitaries in Northern Ireland, when they'd been just let out of prison where they'd been doing life murder and were asked to disarm. They got to get on and disarm immediately. Well, I mean, they were fish out of water. All their followers expected them to be violent, and now they were going to go and disarm them all, and they were completely lost. But they were very good. They wanted to do what they'd promised to do, but they didn't know how to do it. But they were amazing. And they really, they confessed to how difficult it was. And what a ridiculous change, and how the Sinn Féin people had all, that they'd had the good sense while they were doing life for murder to get themselves degrees, and now they were driving around in big cars. And now these poor chaps who'd just done bodybuilding and metal work were absolute nobodies. And it was tough for them. And they went about it with such courage and humility, to be honest. And they were very respectful and good to me. I mean, 10 brigadiers and their sidekicks and me. But they were as good as gold. So I do have hope for people. I think human beings can change and human beings can be touched by each other. So those are the reasons for not despairing. But if you look at the world, it's very hard to remember. So I think we just need to be thinking terribly hard about movement building and how we can do it better and faster.
Thank you. That's very illuminating. Other comments, discussion?
I know Mary-Lise has her hand raised, and then Helen as well.
Good. I can't see them. The tops are missing. Mary-Lise and then Helen. Thank you, Eliza.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Diana, for all you've shared with us. It's just amazing work, and yes, we do despair, but it's also very kind of strengthening to hear that you've done it and you're still willing to give us this webinar so that we can learn from you. And I want to pick up from the question about engaging with young people. I think there is still hope. I always try to be optimistic as we go along, because I always feel like we have a responsibility to the future generation. And a few years ago, I live in the east of England in Norwich, and I did a piece of work under a WILPF branch, working with university students, with the help of a university lecturer in his in politics and international development, but around peace and gender. And there was so much enthusiasm and young people, young university students from different parts of the world. One young lady who led this group was from Germany, and then others from Central Europe, and then up to the Far East. And they learned so much that they went and joined WILPF group once they finished their studies. So I feel like there is still hope. And for all you've shared with us today, like, is there an opportunity to maybe train the trainers, people who will continue to be advocate and take part in this work?
It sounds like you're the person to do
Conflict
it.
sort of resolution. And I love I love where you say that it's also about violence intervention, violence prevention rather than conflict prevention. You know, yes, we can stop conflict, but if conflict cannot be stopped, how do we stop people suffer? I'm originally from Rwanda. I know what violence is all about, and it's just not right. So even though there won't be any immediate action, but at least for us to try and continue to equip and empower the future generation into all the work that you've done. It's like your torch that you carry, you pass it on, and then we pass it on. And hopefully in the years to come, no matter how bad the world seems, you never know. We cannot despair. We can always continue to hope and continue to, because if you look at climate change campaign and the movement, how it's growing, many university students are there. And at the moment, I'm working in the field of health and social care, and there is so much thirst of young people to kind of learn and carry on the work. So in the field of peace and conflict as well, we can try and reach out and see how many. I love the idea of growing the movement. How do we continue to grow? And I think, there is hope. So thank you so much for all you shared today.
Thank you. And thank you for what you've also said, the second person to mention young people, because I think it's hugely important. So I was just sharing my own very, very limited experience now. And I think it's a good reminder that even if we could get one person in 10 in various sectors of this population active, we would be a huge movement. It doesn't mean that everybody's got to be up and at it. That would be brilliant, of course. But 1 in 10 of youngsters who were really into it, committed, going to do something, that would be important. And if it could be more than 1 in 10, and that would actually help grow the number of young people. They themselves would recruit more people. So I think that's a very optimistic vision you brought us, and thank you very much for it. Yeah, that's great. And yes, do some training workshops.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you both. Helen?
Thank you, Diane. I found all of that really, really instructive, so thank you. I just wanted to pick up something that was in your diagram, and I think it also relates to what you're saying, that we need to address what's going on now. And the thing that really struck me that you said was about the modification of stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in the dialogues, you find the person behind the mask.
Yeah,
I thought was an amazing expression that you said. And I'm thinking, well, there's so much talk about people being animals and subhuman or unhuman and all that kind of thing. I don't know how you get to that point where you see the actual people for what they are and can talk to each other, one-to-one as real people.
yeah. I think it's terribly important. And again, referring back to places where I've seen people humbling themselves before other people, confessing to things. It's a fantastic model. And we had one local facilitator in a particular conflict who, when there was, he was just really good at it. When there was some kind of row about to break out, he created diversion by standing for instance, standing in the middle of the circle and saying, I want to confess something. And he'd come up with some kind of minor error that he'd made sometime. And I want you all to come and put your hands on me and forgive me. And everybody got up and went and put their hands on him. And it totally broke the model of let's have a battle now. I mean, it just flattened it in a most non-violent and lovely way. So I actually think vulnerability is like I was saying about the women using their own vulnerability as power to stop conflict. I think that can be hugely powerful by anybody, by any participant or any facilitator who can find a way of saying it's okay to be vulnerable. I'm ready to be vulnerable for this. Yeah, I think that really matters. And one word that I haven't even, I've hardly mentioned it, I don't know if I have at all. The word kindness is important to me, because kindness is what we feel about members of the humankind for each other. And it's what's made societies work. But we just have to make sure that we don't build barriers, units of kindness, that kindness is something we can access in each other, whoever we are and wherever we are. And I think if we're prepared to be vulnerable in order to be kind, that's a very powerful thing to do. And it may be a very, I don't know if this is a good feminist example, but I had a colleague once, years and years ago, who had somebody who was trying to rape her. And she managed to put her hands around his face and say, do you have no one to love you? And he just broke down and cried. I don't think I would ever have the courage to do that, but it certainly worked for her. And she drew on her own kindness to overcome her fear and transform him. So I know it's a far out example, but I don't forget it.
So if we, sorry, is there someone ready to speak? What I was going to say is, should we try to open up the intractable situations that we're in internationally? I have this question in my mind: is there your type of work going on behind the scenes, or is it everything that we see and hear in the media about you know, what's going on in the terrible conflicts there are in the world currently?
I don't know enough to know about many people, but I know about individuals. I mean, I've got an old friend back from my IFOR days. So I've known him since I was about 38, I should think. And he's a kibbutznik. His parents founded the kibbutz he still lives on. He wrote a very good piece for Rethinking Security's blog page about why I stopped being a Zionist. And he's always been, as long as I've known him, he's been in solidarity with Palestinians. He still stands up for them. He sends out mailings. Don't say you didn't know. Just telling you small examples of the horrible stuff that's happening, particularly on the West Bank and to Bedouin people. And he just stays faithful, and he lives on this kibbutz where he's probably just seen as a traitor or a nutter, but he doesn't give up. And I think there are pro-Palestinian peace groups still operating in Israel. Just we don't hear about them. They're kind of pushed aside, but they're there. And I think what we have to think is that if people there actually escape the terrible, terrible violence that's going on now, and there is a future, those people will be the bridge that's there ready to start supporting the Palestinians and actually beginning to heal the relationships with Israelis and Israelis. It's a long way away, but of course there are people who stay faithful to the things they've always believed, always. I've got a good friend in Bethlehem who's a friend of the or was a colleague of the chap in the kibbutz, who's still committed to non-violence. He doesn't change that in spite of what's happening to his people, but it must be very hard. But he stays with that. And I think there are groups who've lost relatives in previous violence. You know, the parents of murdered people who've formed circles and still have them intact. So there's still something there, which, you know, from which something could grow if it got given a chance. Have I in any way responded to your question?
Well, you're talking on a personal and an individual level. I obviously, for anything to move forward, there has to be dramatic changes at international level.
Yeah.
One wonders how that might come about, and what kind of conciliation experiences there are available to those kind of people who are so intransigent. I mean, most of us listening to the straightforward media accounts of what's going on realize that some people are almost impossibly embedded in their attitudes, which are totally othering the people on the other side. You know, where do you make any progress?
Well, for a start, I suppose we can, I don't know to what degree, but we can influence our own government, or can we? I mean, I am disgusted with our government, our new government, almost as much as I was disgusted with our old government, because this one promised something different. And, you know, one of the main things that Keir Starmer said when he was standing for his party to be elected into government was, you know, he'd keep all the military stuff in place. Oh, well, I'll put it up if the spending, if, you know, I'm not going to be a weakling. And, oh, well, I could rant on. So, and Biden's the same, and Kamala Harris shows no sign of being different. I mean, the bizarre thing that Trump's actually said, well, you know, the war in Ukraine, it's crazy, it's going to have to end in talks, you've got to stop the killing. Well, he said a sensible thing, and I find it hard to admit it. But I just think it needs a kind of massive, preferably international movement of people just rising up against the complete nonsense of having a world at war, the utter tragedy. I don't know a single person who's not hugely, deeply upset by what's been happening in Gaza and Lebanon and Israel and so on, because it's just too terrible. And of course, there are other wars that are utterly ghastly, like poor old Sudan. Various groups of Sudanese people are having a terrible time. They're now having a terrible time in Chad with all the refugees and the terrible refugee camps, and not enough room and not enough to eat. I mean, it's just unbearable. And people who are informed must know that this is not how the world should be. It's inhumane. What are we human beings doing, living with such inhumanity and not rising up against it? So I have a huge sense of rising up being needed. And it's hard when you're hitting 80 and you're tired of rising up, but we have to. And we have to harness the support from young people. I don't have a more sensible answer, because I don't see change happening, because people are so wedded to their beastly power blocks and the contest between them. And now the indignation because Putin's actually trying to revive it or construct his own power block. But what, you know, who's talking here? Of course, that's awful, but what about the violence of the West? What about the militarism? What about the bullying and the bombs being pointing at everybody? I mean, it's just crazy. I'm sorry, this is a very useful rant, but probably not much more. I just think a massive movement has to be built for change, and harnessing young people, because in the end, they'll be taken more seriously than the oldies amongst us. But come on, let's have your ideas.
Yes, come on, let's have your ideas.
No, it's fair to ask me, but I think I'm a bit of a spent force, really. I mean, I know the theory, and I know the as they say, the praxis. but it's very hard to see how you can build that on a world level. I think if we could, I mean, really, we should focus on our own government, its policies, and the need to rebuild the diplomatic service and make it work hard, hard, hard to heal relationships, to build relationships, not to kind of keep poking people in the eye and sending big ships to threaten them and all the rest.
Helen.
Yeah, just to comment, just to throw in, it's hard to see how we can move forward while we're so complicit in fueling everything by all the arms that we keep sending. And that just seems to escalate and escalate, and it just, it's tragic, really.
Absolutely, and I think it's a very good time for the campaign against the arms trade, for building support for it. I happen to have a court case coming up on November the 7th, so but I really think that it is time for people to understand that. And Keir Starmer's actually said, I believe, I remember him saying, that he one of his ways of building the economy will be to big up the arms trade. You know, build our arms industry.
Unbelievable.
How do we counter that?
How do we counter it? Shouting very loudly and writing lots and lots of letters and
doing lots of letters.
Standing with placards in front of
exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. We
Claire,
have to build our numbers.
Yes, Claire, you had your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to mention ecocide and the work that's being done to have that made into a crime by the International Criminal Court. I think that's quite an important movement because it's international.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, fellow WILPF members, the TPNW, the Nuclear Weapons Treaty.
Yes.
So that there are some big things happening internationally that don't get into the mainstream media much, but they are, you know, being supported by whole countries and blocks of people in Europe and other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So the indigenous peoples of different parts of the world that are impacted by both the arms trade and the effect of environmental degradation. So I think there is quite a lot going on. This kind of getting it linked up.
Yeah.
Something needs to emerge as a mass movement that a lot of people can get behind. And it's still not quite clear what that's going to be, but it's urgent, I think.
Well,
I think that's important. Thank you.
Well, one of the types of success that you've been talking about is the international movement against fossil fuels, which is moving to have an international treaty. And that has got a lot of, it is very international.
Yes.
And they've got to the stage of getting a dozen or so small, mainly very small Pacific states, but others behind them as well. So you can see in that movement, which of course WILPF is a contributing organization, you can see how they've managed to build the influence build influence into these small Pacific states, to get a bunch of scientists, to get a bunch of religious leaders, and, you know, to go into all these different fields. But it is, of course, like all the ones we've mentioned, it is on a small scale compared with the tragedies of the wars that are going on. And the question really is how you impact on that.
I've found both the last two speakers really helpful. I know that we had a good demo organised jointly between Bath Stop War and Bath Extinction Rebellion in the week on peace and climate justice. It was really good that we were working together. I mean, I happen to be members of both, so I was able to help make that happen. And it had quite a bit of public attention. And I just think we have to do everything we can and a bit more, always a bit more, and making international. I think the idea of a global movement is very powerful. And I think in a way, the fact that we live on one planet because of climate disaster is more self-evident than ever. You can say a war, oh, well, that's awful, but that's over there. You can't say that about climate anymore. But people do because they're stupid, but sorry. But you know, it's easy to contradict and persuade on, you know, you've just got to say, well, what about what happened in Portugal recently, or you know, to get
Paula.
Thank you. I agree what you're saying about the climate justice. I also think a lot of young people take it on board very easily. The thing I feel that nobody's doing, and we need to unite with all organisations, is to have international courts that have got some wally behind them, because we have these sort of judgments made about things being wrong, but nobody enforces. And I don't know any answer to that, but I think WILPF International should be doing something, and other global organisations.
Yeah, good point. Rang a bell with me, but what was it?
I wonder whether reenacting what the 1915 WILPF women did, going to Parliament with the resolutions, because I feel like the politicians, as much as we feel deflated, they also feel deflated. But I feel like if there were to be a women's movement, or all the movements getting together and putting a delegation to the government, and I'm sure within government as well, there are MPs who would want to voice out as well, but they are not having that grassroots movement that they can evidence that there is that need. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, creating
I think that's important.
a movement of, not a movement, but a delegation of individuals who goes to Parliament with written solution as well for Keir Starmer, and say, look, instead of building and enhancing the arms trade, you can do this, or A, B, C, D. What are you choosing? Why are you choosing arms trade instead of A, B, C, D? Do you see what I mean? Because I think they feel like in the community, at the grassroots, within the movement, people are exhausted and tired, which is true. People are struggling with the cost of living and so on and so forth. But I think it's about time we all joined forces and said, in order for the cost of living that we're suffering now to also find a solution, is that we find solution in other issues as well, because arms trade will never solve the cost of living, or it will solve the cost of living temporarily. But how is our country going to be viewed and perceived and seen at the international level if our foundation of looking after our population is founded in other people's suffering? It's wrong. We need to be able to evidence this, and I'm sure that there are people in Parliament who will stand up and voice and support that language as well.
Good thinking.
Yeah, I feel.
I know we get our local MP to ask questions and of ministers, and also she's held a couple of members' debates for us. That's on climate, she's good. On the notion of economic rather than military security, she's good. But anything really anti-war, we're going to have another try in a month. We've got a meeting arranged with her. A small group of people meet with her and we say, what can you do for us? And she'll come up with something just because she feels she's got a reputation for being responsive. So we work on that. But we're fortunate that we can get somebody to do something, and she won't do the hardest things. But it's certainly worth a try. And I think doing something publicly, even if the government doesn't take too much notice, you get publicity out of it if you publicize it well. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, even the way you bring your MP to, like you lobby your MP. If I can do the same my end and then and others in their areas, but then bring these MPs that we've all lobbied together again in a room and hold them accountable together, because sometimes I feel like your MP will also struggle to speak up on his own in Parliament and be the but then if there is a coalition of MPs, 4, 5, 6, all lobbied by their constituency and they have the same facts together, even more, then their voices will be more stronger in Parliament than just one person being singled out, if you see what I mean. Because the MPs are also human beings who have put themselves forward, but there is a certain limit where you're going to put like threshold you can cross on your own, if you see what I mean. But if there are many numbers singing in the same chorus, then yeah, that could work.
I mean, there are all-party parliamentary groups on some things, so we can look out those. But have you heard of or are you familiar with Rethinking Security?
No, I just took note now for myself.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
because
WILPF is aware of it, yes.
WILPF's a member, I think.
Yes,
of the network.
And we've had sessions, not well attended, but we've had at least one session on this.
Okay, but it can be useful, and they're doing they've made a submission to the Defence Review. Keir Starmer's ended. Why do they call it defence? It's not defence anyway. Anyway, the attack review.
Yes. Claire, I've got Claire.
I know I've spoken a couple of times, but just to say, I'm in Scotland, and some of you probably know that a woman called Janet Fenton.
Oh, of course, we know her. She's a luminary in WILPF.
Yeah. But she's also a friend of mine and colleague in other groups, and she, with others, set up Secure Scotland, which is almost like a sort of branch of Rethinking Security. It's that same idea. And we are a bit lucky in Scotland that we have a bit more sympathy amongst the devolved government that we're talking about. It's not secure, though. We've still got to keep on reinventing it, as you were saying, Diana. We can't sit on our laurels, but there is, there are cross-party groups that are happy to talk about the kind of issues that we've been discussing today. So I'll certainly do what I can to act on some of the things we've talked about today.
Brilliant.
And Marie-Lisa, I'm so excited by the things that you've been talking about. So it would be really good to communicate afterwards, maybe. I'd really like to do that. We'll find a way of doing it.
Good. That's brilliant.
Very, very good. Now, we've got not long now before we need to wind up. So I do want to encourage anyone who hasn't spoken and has an idea to come forward. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Talking about doing what we can against the arms trade and showing the government we don't want them to be buying arms and sending arms. Every 2 years there is a campaign against the arms trade at
Yes,
Excel.
yes.
And I
And
mean,
WILPF belongs to it. Yeah.
right. So I know there was a fair amount the last one I went to, but maybe if we could get even more people to go to that. Again, I don't know how. Just a huge amount. And there was another thing that I used to go to annually. There was a dinner, a grand dinner being held at a London hotel. I think it's Grosvenor Hotel. I can't remember. Where all the people who were dealing with buying arms would go there for this grand thing, and it was in January. And I'm been trying to find out while we've been online here if that's happening again. January each year there's an event, but I've been up there before, and there's maybe been a handful of us, maybe 20 people. I mean, I can find out more. I can't find out now. I've been trying, but I just think, okay, it's great that WILPF is part of the Excel thing. I just think maybe we need to try and get more people. I don't know if it would help.
Well, we need to try and get more people for everything. Can you share your name with us?
Oh, sorry, yeah, Patricia, a friend of
Thank you.
Helen's, yeah.
Thank you, Patricia.
Okay, I mean, it's like with everything, we're all trying so hard and writing letters and
yes,
yeah,
exactly so. These are all
keep...
threads that we try and do, and you'll notice that almost everything that's come up, we've been able to say, WILPF is participating in that, WILPF is part of that network, and so on.
Yeah.
I want to use this last few minutes to put something else in your heads. And that is that as well as being totally against militarism, which we are and have been for over 100 years, and campaigned, and like Marilise says, we've sent delegations to heads of state and so on, we've come to a position where the planet has not got a future, a life, and it's very near to the end of its life. And the only way of tackling this is not just demilitarization, but is to stop what many politicians and all governments think is the answer to everything, which is growth. And growth comes from the capitalist system in which we're all embedded, and capitalism cannot exist without expansion and making profit and therefore growth. And however radical, and he's not radical at all, Keir Starmer, however radical a government might be, it's still claiming that the answer to everything is growth. And this planet cannot cope with that. Now, there's a lot of material out there. Go onto the internet, put in degrowth or post-growth and get some articles. And we've got International WILPF has also contributed to this discussion. And we all need to find out more about this and realize that alongside demilitarization and looking for peaceful solutions, we've got to reduce the consumption of the planet that we're engaged in. So I'm putting that in your heads for you to go off and think about and learn more about, because I'm hoping that WILPF is going to move forward on that platform. Now, who's got something to say before I close this very fascinating discussion? Come on, you must have something more to say. Well, I'm disappointed in you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you a million times to Diana, for being such an inspiration and to giving us so much information and ideas and moving us forward. And if there's anyone on this call who's not already a member of WILPF, join us, because we're working on all these fronts together at once. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Diana. It was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Really, really brilliant. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Fran.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Will.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.